God and Satan made a bet, and one man's life became the wager. It sounds like fiction, but this cosmic gamble is at the heart of one of the Bible's most challenging stories. Job's journey from prosperity to despair and back again isn't just ancient history. It's a powerful lesson about faith, resilience, and the nature of good and evil that still resonates today. In the land of Uz, there lived a man named Job. He wasn't just any man. Job was known far and wide for his integrity, his devotion to God, and his incredible prosperity. Picture a vast estate teeming with life. 7,000 sheep grazing on rolling hills, 3,000 camels carrying goods across desert trade routes, 500 yoke of oxen ploughing fertile fields, and 500 donkeys braying in their pens. This was the wealth of Job, a testament to his success and favor with God. But Job's true riches weren't just in his livestock. He had a loving family, 7 sons and 3 daughters, who brought him joy and laughter. His home was a bustling center of warmth and celebration, with frequent feasts that brought the family together. In the community, Job was respected as a wise counselor and a generous benefactor. People sought his advice, admired his character, and spoke of him as the greatest man among all the people of the East. Yet even in this picture of abundance, there was an undercurrent of fragility. Job understood that all he had could vanish in an instant. Perhaps it was this awareness that drove his deep reverence for God and his meticulous spiritual practices. After each round of feasting, when his children had celebrated together, Job would rise early in the morning to offer burnt offerings for each of them. Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts, he would think, his concern for their spiritual well-being outweighing any pride in their worldly success. This practice of sacrifice was common in the ancient Near East, where people believed that regular offerings could appease the gods and secure continued blessings. But Job's sacrifices were different. They weren't motivated by superstition or a desire for more wealth. Instead, they stemmed from a genuine love for God and a deep understanding of human frailty. Job knew that true prosperity came from a right relationship with the divine, not just material possessions. As the smoke from Job's sacrifices rose to the heavens, little did he know that his unwavering faith was about to be put to the ultimate test. The very consistency and depth of his devotion had caught the attention of powers beyond his understanding. In the courts of heaven, a conversation was about to take place that would shake the foundations of Job's world. Job's life stood as a beacon of righteousness and success, a living example of the blessings that could come from following God's ways. But was his faith as pure as it seemed? Could it withstand the loss of everything he held dear? These questions were about to be answered in a divine drama that would push Job to his limits and challenge everything he thought he knew about God, suffering, and the nature of faith itself. As the sun set on another day of abundance in Uz, Job couldn't have imagined the storm that was brewing. His steadfast character was about to face a trial that would echo through the ages, a test of faith that would challenge believers for generations to come. The stage was set, and the heavenly curtain was about to rise on a cosmic wager, with Job's life hanging in the balance. While Job slept peacefully, unaware of the forces gathering above, a cosmic assembly convened that would change his life forever. In this heavenly court, a challenge was issued that would put Job's unwavering devotion to the ultimate test. What happens when God allows evil to target his most faithful servant? The celestial realm buzzed with activity as God and the angels gathered for a divine assembly. Among them, a figure known as the accuser, Satan himself, appeared. This was no ordinary courtroom. It was a place where the fate of souls hung in the balance, and the very nature of faith was about to be questioned. God's voice rang out, filled with pride as he spoke of his servant Job. "Have you noticed my servant Job?" he asked Satan. "There is no one like him, honest and true to his word, completely devoted to God and a hater of evil." These words of praise set the stage for what was to come, highlighting Job's exceptional character and unwavering faith. Satan, ever the skeptic, wasn't impressed. He challenged God's assessment of Job's integrity, suggesting that the man's faith was built on shaky foundations. "Is it any wonder Job is so devoted?" Satan sneered. "You've blessed him with wealth, family, and protection, but take away those comforts, and I guarantee he'll curse your name to your face." The tension in the heavenly court was palpable. This wasn't just a debate about one man's faith. It was a challenge to the very nature of human devotion to God. Could genuine faith exist without the promise of reward? Was Job's loyalty to God conditional on his blessings? God, in his infinite wisdom, accepted Satan's challenge. The terms of the wager were set. Satan would be allowed to strip Job of his possessions and afflict him, but he was not permitted to take Job's life. This limitation underscored God's ultimate authority, even as he allowed suffering to touch his faithful servant. The implications of this celestial bet were profound. Theologians have long grappled with the concept of divine sovereignty in the face of human suffering. Why would an all-powerful, loving God allow such trials to befall the righteous? The story of Job suggests that there are forces at work beyond human understanding, and that faith tested in fire can emerge stronger than ever. As Satan departed from the heavenly court, eager to begin his assault on Job's faith, the angels watched in anticipation. What would become of the righteous man from Uz? Could his integrity withstand the loss of everything he held dear? The consequences of this wager would soon ripple through Job's life, testing not only his faith, but also challenging those around him to reconsider their understanding of God's justice. With a nod of divine permission, the stage was set for Job's trials to begin. The serene hills of Uz, once a picture of prosperity and peace, were about to become a battleground for the soul of a righteous man. As the heavenly court adjourned, the focus shifted to the earthly realm, where Job, still blissfully unaware, was about to face the greatest test of his life. The sun rose on what seemed like another ordinary day in Uz, but the wheels of a cosmic drama were already in motion. Job's unwavering faith, once a source of comfort and pride, was about to become his shield against unimaginable loss and suffering. The question remained, would it be enough? Job's vast herds grazed contentedly across his lands, a testament to his prosperity and God's favor. But in the coming hours, those same fields would bear witness to a series of tragedies so swift and severe they would challenge the very foundations of Job's beliefs. What happens when a righteous man loses everything but his life? As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Job went about his daily routine. He inspected his flocks, spoke with his servants, and prepared for another day of managing his vast estate. The air was filled with the familiar sounds of bleating sheep and lowing oxen, a symphony of abundance that had become the backdrop to Job's blessed life. Little did Job know that beyond the peaceful hills of Uz, forces were gathering that would shatter his world. In those times, the threat of raiding parties was ever present, capable of destroying a family's security and wealth in mere moments. Yet Job, in his righteousness, had never feared such dangers, trusting in God's protection. As the day wore on, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. A lone figure emerged, running towards Job with urgency. The first messenger arrived, breathless and wide-eyed with shock. "Master!" he gasped. "The Sabaeans attacked! They've taken all the oxen and donkeys and killed the servants watching over them. I alone have escaped to tell you." Before Job could process this devastating news, a second messenger appeared. "Fire has fallen from the sky," he cried. "It has burned up all the sheep and the servants tending them. Only I have survived to bring you word." The loss of livestock wasn't just a financial blow. It struck at the heart of Job's social standing and his ability to provide for his community. Job's mind reeled, trying to make sense of these calamities. But the onslaught of tragedy was far from over. A third messenger stumbled in, his clothes torn in grief. "The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties," he reported. "They swept down on the camels and carried them off. The servants were put to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." With each report, the scale of Job's losses mounted. His vast wealth, accumulated over a lifetime of hard work and divine blessing, was vanishing before his eyes. Yet the worst was still to come. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land that was no longer his, a final messenger approached. His face was ashen, his steps heavy with the weight of unbearable news. "Your sons and daughters were feasting in their oldest brother's house," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Suddenly, a mighty wind swept in from the desert. It struck the house on all 4 corners. The building collapsed and all your children are dead. I am the only survivor." In the span of a single day, Job had lost everything: his livelihood, his wealth, and most devastatingly, his beloved children. The feasts that once brought his family together in joy were now silenced forever. The prosperous man of Uz, revered throughout the land, now stood empty-handed and heartbroken. As night fell, an eerie quiet settled over Job's estate. The absence of animal sounds and human voices was deafening. Job stood alone, the weight of his losses threatening to crush him. How would he respond to this unimaginable turn of events? Would his faith withstand this ultimate test, or would he curse the God he had so faithfully served? The answer to these questions would reveal the true nature of Job's character and the depth of his devotion. In the silence of that devastating night, an unexpected sound broke through the darkness. As the weight of loss pressed down on Job, his response would challenge everything we think we know about human nature in the face of tragedy. What could possibly drive a man to praise God after losing everything? Job's first actions were deeply rooted in the mourning customs of his time. He tore his robe, a visceral expression of his inner anguish. Then, in a gesture of utter humility and grief, he shaved his head. These physical acts of mourning were Job's outward manifestation of the pain that threatened to tear him apart from within. But it was what came next that would echo through the ages. As Job fell to the ground in prostration, words of startling acceptance fell from his lips. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. May the name of the Lord be praised." In this moment of profound loss, Job acknowledged the temporary nature of earthly possessions and the sovereignty of God over all things. Job's response stands in stark contrast to typical human reactions to such catastrophic loss. Where many might rage against fate, curse their circumstances, or sink into despair, Job's words reflect a deep-seated faith that transcends his immediate suffering. This is not the reaction of a man in denial, but of one whose core beliefs remain unshaken even as his world crumbles around him. The depth of Job's faith in the face of tragedy is nothing short of remarkable. Despite losing his wealth, his status, and most heartbreakingly his children, Job refuses to sin by charging God with wrongdoing. His integrity remains intact, a beacon of unwavering devotion amidst a storm of suffering that would break most people. From a psychological perspective, Job's response demonstrates an extraordinary level of resilience. His ability to find meaning and maintain his values in the face of overwhelming loss speaks to a profound inner strength. Yet, it's important to note that resilience doesn't mean an absence of pain. Job's actions of mourning show that he fully felt the weight of his losses. His faith didn't numb him to suffering, but rather gave him a framework to process it. As the dust settled on Job's ruined estate, a question hung in the air. How long could this remarkable faith endure? Job had weathered the initial shock of loss with astounding grace. but the road ahead was long and fraught with challenges. Would his praise of God continue as the reality of his new circumstances set in? Or would the constant ache of absence and the grinding poverty of his new life eventually erode his devotion? For now, Job's faith held firm. His continued praise of God in the face of such adversity was a testament to the depth of his character and the strength of his convictions. As dawn broke on a new day, Job faced a world utterly changed, yet his core remained unshaken. His response to unimaginable loss had set the stage for one of the most profound tests of faith in biblical history. Little did Job know, but his unwavering devotion had not gone unnoticed. High above, in the celestial realms where his fate had first been debated, a new conversation was about to begin. The heavenly wager was far from over, and Job's trials were only just beginning. While Job grappled with his newfound poverty on earth, a cosmic debate raged above. Satan, unsatisfied with Job's resilience, proposed a challenge that would target something far more personal than wealth or family. How does one's faith respond when the enemy's assault moves from external circumstances to the very flesh and bone of existence? Once again, the heavenly court assembled, and God's voice rang out with pride. "Have you considered my servant Job?" he asked Satan. "Despite all that has happened, he still maintains his integrity. There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Satan, undeterred by Job's initial steadfastness, presented a new and more insidious challenge. "Skin for skin," he retorted. "A man will give all he has for his own life. But stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." This proposition raised the stakes dramatically, suggesting that physical suffering would be the ultimate test of Job's faith. God, in his infinite wisdom, allowed this second test, but set a clear boundary. "Very well," he said to Satan, "he is in your hands, but you must spare his life." This limitation underscored God's ultimate authority over life and death, even as he permitted suffering to touch his faithful servant. The concept of divine limits in the midst of suffering raises profound theological questions. Why would an all-powerful, loving God allow such intense physical trials to befall the righteous? The narrative suggests that there are forces at work beyond human understanding, and that faith tested through physical affliction can reveal its true depth and strength. As Satan departed from the heavenly court, anticipation built for the physical ordeal Job would face. The spiritual battlefield was shifting from Job's possessions and family to his own body. How would he respond when pain became his constant companion? Would his praise of God continue when every moment brought agony? The stakes of this test extended beyond Job's individual suffering. It challenged fundamental beliefs about the nature of faith, the relationship between physical health and divine favor, and the limits of human endurance in the face of seeming injustice. With divine permission granted, Satan left the celestial realm, ready to unleash a new wave of suffering upon Job. The faithful servant of God, still reeling from his losses but firm in his devotion, had no idea of the physical torment that awaited him. As the heavens fell silent, the focus shifted back to earth. Job, his body still whole but his world shattered, was about to face a trial that would push him to the very brink of his faith and sanity. The question hung in the air. When the pain became unbearable, would Job's integrity remain intact, or would he finally break and curse the God he had served so faithfully? In ancient times, illness wasn't just a physical burden, it was a mark of shame. As Job's body began to betray him, he faced a test far more insidious than loss of wealth or family. Could his faith withstand the ultimate assault on his flesh and spirit? Job's once healthy body now bore the marks of intense suffering. Painful sores erupted across his skin, covering him from head to toe. Every movement brought agony, and relief seemed impossible. The man who once stood tall as a pillar of his community now sat in ashes, scraping his lesions with a piece of broken pottery in a futile attempt to ease his discomfort. Isolation compounded Job's physical torment. In a society where illness was often viewed as divine punishment, Job found himself cut off from the community that once revered him. The fear of contagion and the stigma of perceived sin kept others at a distance, leaving Job to face his pain alone. In this moment of utter despair, Job's wife approached him. Rather than offering comfort, her words cut deep. "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." Her advice, born of her own anguish and hopelessness, added a new layer of emotional pain to Job's already overwhelming suffering. The one person who should have been his closest support now urged him to abandon his faith. The impact of his wife's words cannot be overstated. In ancient Near Eastern societies, wives were expected to be caretakers and supporters of their husbands. Her suggestion to curse God reflected a complete breakdown of this supportive role under the weight of their shared tragedy. Job now faced not only physical agony and social isolation, but also the potential loss of his last familial relationship. While the exact nature of Job's illness is not specified in the biblical text, his symptoms align with several severe skin conditions known in the ancient world. The description of sores covering his body suggests a systemic infection or autoimmune disorder that would have caused intense, chronic pain. Beyond the physical symptoms, Job likely experienced significant mental health challenges, including depression and anxiety, as is common with chronic pain conditions. As Job sat in misery, scraping his sores and mourning all he had lost, the ultimate test of his faith loomed. Would he heed his wife's advice and curse the God he had served so faithfully? Or would he find the strength to maintain his integrity even as his body and spirit were pushed to their limits? In a display of remarkable resilience, Job responded to his wife, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Even in the depths of his suffering, Job refused to speak against God or question divine justice. His declaration, "Even if he kills me, I still trust in him," stands as a testament to unshakable faith in the face of unimaginable adversity. Job's steadfast response marked a pivotal moment in his journey. He had withstood the loss of his wealth, the death of his children, and now the assault on his own body. Yet his faith remained intact. As news of Job's condition spread, 3 of his friends set out to visit him, unaware that their arrival would mark the beginning of a new and equally challenging chapter in Job's trials. As Job's friends journeyed to offer comfort, they could not have imagined the scene that awaited them. What they encountered would challenge not only their understanding of friendship, but also their deepest beliefs about the nature of suffering and divine justice. How would these 3 men respond to a test that would push the boundaries of ancient customs and shake the foundations of their faith? Word of Job's misfortune spread quickly across the land, reaching the ears of his 3 closest friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. Without hesitation, they set out from their homes, driven by a sense of loyalty and obligation that was deeply ingrained in their culture. The journey was long and arduous, but their determination to comfort their friend never wavered. As they approached Job's home, the once prosperous estate now lay in ruins, a stark testament to the depths of Job's losses. The sight that greeted them upon arrival was even more shocking. There sat Job, barely recognizable, his body covered in painful sores, scraping himself with a piece of broken pottery. The man who had once been the greatest of all the people of the East now sat in ashes, a picture of utter desolation. The friends' initial reaction was one of profound grief. In keeping with the mourning customs of their time, they tore their robes and threw dust on their heads. These gestures, deeply symbolic, expressed their solidarity with Job's suffering and their own sense of anguish at his condition. Yet, as they drew closer, the cultural expectations of comfort began to clash with the harsh reality before them. In ancient Near Eastern culture, friends were expected to provide unwavering support during times of trouble. This often meant offering words of consolation, sharing in mourning rituals, and helping to make sense of the suffering. But faced with the magnitude of Job's affliction, words seemed inadequate, and explanations felt hollow. What followed was perhaps the most powerful expression of friendship in the entire narrative: 7 days and nights of silence. The 3 men sat on the ground with Job, saying nothing. This extended period of quiet mourning was not merely a passive act, but a profound demonstration of empathy and shared grief. In a society that valued communal expressions of sorrow, this silent vigil spoke volumes about the depth of their friendship and the weight of Job's suffering. As the days passed, the tension grew. The expectations of their culture and their own desire to offer comfort warred with the overwhelming nature of Job's plight. What could they possibly say in the face of such devastation? How could they reconcile their friend's reputation for righteousness with his current state of misery? The anticipation built as the 7th day drew to a close. The friends, and perhaps Job himself, knew that the silence could not last forever. Something had to give, some word had to be spoken to break the oppressive quiet that had settled over them. Finally, it was Job who shattered the silence. In a heart-wrenching lament, he cursed the day of his birth, wishing he had never come into existence. His words, raw and unfiltered, expressed the depths of his anguish and set the stage for the intense theological debate that was to follow. As Job's bitter cry faded, his friends exchanged glances. The time for silent solidarity had passed. Now they felt compelled to speak, to offer explanations, to defend their understanding of divine justice in the face of their friend's apparent undeserved suffering. Little did they know that their words, intended to bring comfort, would instead spark a profound and challenging exploration of faith, suffering, and the nature of God's relationship with humanity. As the silence shattered, a new tension arose. What if the very words meant to comfort Job would instead challenge the foundations of their faith? Eliphaz, the eldest of Job's friends, stepped forward, his well-intentioned counsel about to ignite a debate that would echo through the ages. Eliphaz began his speech with a gentle yet probing question. "If someone ventures a word with you, will you be impatient?" His tone was cautious, aware of the delicate situation, but his words carried the weight of centuries of wisdom. Eliphaz's argument centered on a belief deeply ingrained in ancient Near Eastern thought. Suffering is a direct consequence of one's actions. With conviction, Eliphaz asserted, "Has any truly innocent person ever ended in misfortune, or has any truly upright person ever been lost in the end?" This statement encapsulated the prevailing view of divine retribution, where the righteous are rewarded and the wicked punished. In Eliphaz's mind, the equation was simple. Job's misfortunes must stem from some hidden sin or wrongdoing. Job listened, his face a mask of pain and confusion. He had proclaimed his innocence from the start, and now his friend's words struck at the very core of his beliefs. The tension in the air was palpable as Job struggled to reconcile Eliphaz's assertions with his own lived experience of undeserved suffering. Eliphaz's speech revealed the theological assumptions that underpinned his worldview. He believed in a strict moral economy, where God's justice was meted out in this life. In his mind, Job's suffering could only indicate a failure in righteousness. This perspective left no room for the complexity of human experience or the mystery of divine purpose. To bolster his argument, Eliphaz appealed to traditional wisdom, stating, "We have much to learn, for we are newcomers, and life is so fleeting that we have no time. This appeal to ancestral knowledge was a common rhetorical technique in ancient debates, lending weight to Eliphaz's words through the authority of generations past. As Eliphaz's speech drew to a close, the air crackled with anticipation. How would Job respond to this challenge to his integrity? The stage was set for a profound exploration of faith, suffering, and the nature of divine justice. Job's response was swift and passionate. "I am being ridiculed by my friends," he cried out. "It is easy for those who are well off to accuse, for the prosperous to despise those who are worse off." His words cut through Eliphaz's carefully constructed arguments, exposing the inadequacy of simplistic explanations in the face of profound suffering. Job's rebuttal introduced a new level of complexity to the debate. He challenged the notion that suffering could be directly attributed to personal sin, suggesting that the reality of human experience was far more nuanced than Eliphaz's assertions allowed. Job's words hinted at a deeper understanding of faith and suffering, one that would push the boundaries of ancient wisdom. As Job fell silent, the friends exchanged glances. It was clear that this was only the beginning of a long and intense debate. Each would have their say, presenting their perspective on the nature of suffering, justice, and divine sovereignty. Little did they know that their words would form the basis of a theological exploration that would challenge believers for generations to come. The friends' words, meant to comfort, became arrows that pierced Job's already wounded heart. But as his frustration grew, so did his resolve. Could it be that Job's greatest act of faith was yet to come, in the form of a bold confrontation with the Almighty? As the debate raged on, Job found himself caught in an exhausting cycle of accusations and defenses. His friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, took turns presenting their arguments, each convinced that Job's suffering must be the result of some hidden sin. They clung to the belief that God always rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked, leaving no room for the possibility of undeserved suffering. Job, however, refused to accept their simplistic explanations. With each round of speeches, his frustration mounted. He maintained his innocence, challenging the notion that his misfortunes were a divine punishment. The once patient man began to speak with increasing boldness, his words tinged with bitterness and despair. As the accusations piled up, Job's desire to confront God directly grew stronger. He longed for an opportunity to plead his case before the divine court, convinced that if he could only speak with God face to face, he would be vindicated. This yearning for a direct encounter with the Almighty revealed the depth of Job's faith, even in the midst of his anguish. Job's statements about divine justice became more pointed and passionate. He questioned the fairness of a system that seemed to allow the wicked to prosper while the righteous suffered. In his pain, Job dared to challenge God's apparent silence in the face of injustice, crying out for answers and understanding. The psychological toll of his friends' accusations weighed heavily on Job. Their well-intentioned but misguided attempts to explain his suffering only added to his distress. The constant blame and insinuations of guilt threatened to erode Job's sense of self-worth and shake the foundations of his faith. As Job's frustration reached its peak, he made a final impassioned appeal for a hearing with God. He longed to present his case, to understand the reasons behind his suffering, and to clear his name before the divine judge. This plea represented both the depth of Job's anguish and the strength of his conviction in his own integrity. The air crackled with tension as Job's words hung in the air. His friends fell silent, their arguments exhausted. Would God answer Job's challenge? Would the heavens open and provide the explanation Job so desperately sought? As the dust settled on this intense debate, a new voice prepared to enter the fray. Elihu, a younger man who had been listening silently, could no longer contain his thoughts. His arrival would bring a fresh perspective to the age-old questions of suffering, justice, and faith that had been swirling around Job's ash heap. As the heated debate reached its zenith, an unexpected voice cut through the tension. What insights could this young observer, Elihu, possibly offer that the seasoned elders had missed? His words would challenge not only Job and his friends, but also our understanding of divine wisdom itself. Elihu had been listening intently to the back and forth between Job and his three friends. As the youngest among them, he had remained silent out of respect for his elders, but now his frustration boiled over. He could no longer contain his thoughts on what he perceived as flawed arguments from both sides. With passionate intensity, Elihu addressed both Job and his friends. He criticized the older men for their inability to refute Job's claims effectively. At the same time, he rebuked Job for justifying himself rather than God. Elihu's approach was bold and direct, reflecting the fire of youth tempered with a deep reverence for divine wisdom. Elihu presented a fresh perspective on Job's suffering, one that diverged from the simplistic cause and effect model proposed by the other friends. He argued that suffering could serve as a form of divine discipline, a means by which God communicates with and guides individuals back to righteousness. This nuanced view suggested that trials could have a redemptive purpose beyond mere punishment or reward. The theological implications of Elihu's arguments were profound. He emphasized God's justice and mercy, insisting that divine actions were ultimately aimed at the restoration of individuals rather than their destruction. Elihu painted a picture of a God who uses various means, including suffering, to draw people closer to him and to teach valuable lessons. Elihu's presence highlighted the generational differences in ancient wisdom traditions. While elders were typically seen as the bearers of wisdom and experience, Elihu's youthful perspective challenged this norm. His intervention suggested that fresh insights could come from unexpected sources, regardless of age or status. As Elihu's impassioned speech continued, anticipation built for how God would respond to all these human arguments. Would the Almighty validate Elihu's perspective? Or would God's answer transcend all human understanding of suffering and divine justice? Interestingly, Elihu's long discourse ended without a direct reply from Job. This silence added to the mounting tension, leaving the audience to wonder about the impact of Elihu's words. Had he succeeded in bridging the gap between human understanding and divine wisdom? Or had he merely added another layer of complexity to an already intricate debate? As Elihu's voice faded, a palpable sense of expectation filled the air. The stage was now set for the long-awaited divine response. After all the human arguments had been exhausted, would God finally break his silence? And if so, what revelations awaited Job and his companions? The cosmic drama was about to reach its climax, with implications that would resonate through the ages. The silence was shattered by a sound unlike any other. God had finally chosen to speak, but not with gentle whispers or soothing platitudes. Instead, the creator of the universe unleashed a barrage of questions that would make even the wisest scholars tremble. What could these cosmic inquiries reveal about the nature of suffering and the limits of human wisdom? From the heart of a whirlwind, God's voice thundered forth, addressing Job directly. This dramatic entrance echoed ancient Near Eastern traditions of storm theophanies, where deities revealed themselves through powerful natural phenomena. The whirlwind symbolized divine power and authority, emphasizing God's majesty and sovereignty over creation. God's speech took an unexpected turn. Rather than providing answers to Job's anguished questions about suffering, the Almighty posed a series of challenging inquiries. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" God asked. "Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know." These questions highlighted the vast gulf between divine and human understanding, challenging Job's ability to comprehend the complexities of creation and providence. As God's speech continued, he referenced various animals and natural phenomena, including the mysterious behemoth and leviathan. These creatures, often interpreted as symbols of chaos and power, represented God's control over the forces of nature and the universe. The vivid descriptions of these beings reflected ancient Near Eastern mythology, where such creatures embodied the chaos that gods had to subdue to maintain cosmic order. The theological implications of God's speech were profound. By emphasizing the intricacies of creation and the limitations of human knowledge, God challenged the notion that divine justice could be fully comprehended by mortal minds. This perspective suggested that suffering and the apparent unfairness of life might have purposes beyond human understanding. God's words painted a picture of a universe far more complex and mysterious than Job or his friends had imagined. The contrast between God's cosmic perspective and human understanding was stark, illustrating the limitations of human wisdom in grasping the complexities of divine governance and the natural world. As God's speech drew to a close, the air crackled with anticipation. How would Job respond to this divine revelation? Would he maintain his earlier stance of demanding answers, or would this encounter with the Almighty reshape his understanding of faith and suffering? In a moment of profound humility, Job acknowledged his limited understanding. "I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know," he said. This admission marked a pivotal moment in the narrative, illustrating the theme of humility before divine wisdom and the recognition of human frailty in the face of suffering. As Job's words faded, the focus shifted to God's judgment on the entire situation. The cosmic drama had reached its climax, but the implications of this divine encounter would continue to resonate through the ages, challenging believers to reconsider their understanding of faith, suffering, and the nature of God's relationship with humanity. As the dust settled from God's whirlwind appearance, a startling twist awaited. Who would face God's wrath, and who would receive his blessing? The answer reveals a profound truth about faith that still resonates today. God's attention turned to Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. His words were stern as he rebuked them. "My anger burns against you and your two friends because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has." This divine judgment cast their well-intentioned but misguided counsel in a new light, revealing the danger of presuming to fully understand God's ways. In a surprising turn, God vindicated Job's integrity. Despite Job's moments of despair and questioning, his overall faithfulness stood in contrast to his friends' rigid theology. This validation highlighted the complexity of faith and suffering, showing that honest wrestling with God could be more authentic than unquestioning acceptance of traditional wisdom. Yet God's justice was tempered with mercy. He instructed Eliphaz and his companions to offer sacrifices for their error, but with an unexpected twist, Job would intercede on their behalf. This act of reconciliation demonstrated the power of forgiveness and the restoration of community in the aftermath of suffering and misunderstanding. As Job prayed for his friends, a remarkable transformation began. The biblical account states that God restored Job's fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. His flocks multiplied, with 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. This doubling of his previous wealth symbolized not just material restoration, but a complete renewal of God's blessing. The restoration extended beyond material possessions. Job was blessed with 7 sons and 3 daughters, mirroring his original family. The text specifically mentions the beauty of his daughters and notes that Job gave them an inheritance alongside their brothers, an unusual practice for the time that perhaps reflected a new perspective gained through his trials. This restoration raises profound theological questions about divine justice and mercy. It challenges simplistic notions of karma or divine retribution, suggesting a more complex interplay between human faithfulness and God's sovereign will. Job's story illustrates that while suffering may not always be explained or justified, it does not have the final word in the lives of the faithful. As Job's life was renewed, he entered a period of unprecedented blessing. The scripture records that he lived 140 years after his trials, seeing his children and grandchildren to the fourth generation. This long life was seen as a sign of divine favor in ancient Near Eastern culture, a final affirmation of Job's righteousness. Job's journey from prosperity through suffering and back to blessing became a powerful testimony. His story challenges believers to consider the nature of faith in the face of adversity and the limits of human understanding when confronted with divine mystery. As the narrative of Job's life drew to a close, it opened up new questions about the relationship between God and humanity, the purpose of suffering, and the nature of true wisdom. Job's story confronts us with profound questions about the nature of suffering, faith, and divine justice. Why do bad things happen to good people? Is there a higher purpose to our pain? These age-old dilemmas still resonate today. Job's unwavering faith in the face of immense loss teaches us about resilience and trust. His willingness to question God while maintaining his integrity shows that doubt and faith can coexist. The limitations of human understanding in grasping divine purposes remind us to approach life's mysteries with humility. Perhaps the most enduring lesson is that faith tested through adversity can emerge stronger. Job's restoration doesn't erase his suffering, but reframes it within a larger context of divine wisdom and mercy. As we face our own trials, Job's journey invites us to hold on to hope even when answers seem out of reach.